Awesome. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate this. The FSU Comic Book Club and Film Club, who hopefully they're going to show up soon. We're really appreciative of this opportunity. I've been a fan of your work for a very long time. I collected all the issues of Sideways. Um, and yeah, so here are the questions.
I forget. Well, everybody be out celebrating Mardi Gras today. I was surprised you guys want to do it on a Tuesday.
Actually, that might make a lot of sense because FSU is a bit of a party school, so
Yeah, I forget I got my beads on just for you guys. There you go.
okay.
Where are you based, by the way? What town? What city in? Where?
FSU's in Tallahassee, but I'm from Miami.
Oh, okay.
Are you in Florida? It's on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'm in Tampa. That's why. Yeah,
Awesome, awesome. Florida's the best state.
Yeah, we're over by UCF. That's why.
Awesome. There are anime. Um,
Yeah, I know that.
I
You
won't
learn
hold
that
it
fast,
against
kid.
you.
That's okay. That's okay.
The first question is, what got you into comics? Like, what characters or writers did you follow growing up, and what was like your inspiration?
It's a long road. All these things are long roads. I mean, I first started collecting when I was or first started reading comics probably when I was about 10 years old. And maybe even exposed to comics even earlier than that. I mean, things like the original Adam West Batman series and the original Spider-Man series in the 60s were really my introduction to those characters. And then when I saw books about them, your parents would pick you up one or here or there. But I liked a lot of the horror movies and things like that. So I used to buy comics like House of Mystery, House of Secrets, which DC put out, or Where Monsters Dwell, which was Marvel. And somehow I wound up gravitating to the superhero material through those books, and ultimately then I started just buying mostly superhero material from there. Always a comics fan, also an animation fan. So what I basically I started working in TV, but still loved comics. Found a way to do a little writing on the side for them, as well as do reporting for comics, just as a side thing while I was working in TV. And then, just through circumstances throughout the years, I wound up doing some writing for DC, and then ultimately, completely independent of that, met someone that got me on the path to actually start working for DC back in 2002.
Oh yeah, that's actually the next question. Like, how did you get started? And working in comics and like as DC as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I knew the people I knew the people at DC for a while. While I was working at ABC in children's animation, children's television, I was developing Metal Men as an animated series with Jeanette Kahn, who was the president and publisher at the time. And Jeanette and I had worked on the series, and it didn't get together for a number of reasons at ABC. But I had been doing some work and actually got a job co-writing Superboy with Jimmy Palmiotti, who was a friend of mine. And at the same time, though, I had another friend introduce me to Paul Levitz, who was who basically was, running everything for DC at that moment. And what happened was I was looking to change positions. I was looking to get back on the East Coast. Paul was looking for somebody who had outside experience but knew comics well. And we sat together. We did about 6 interviews over about a 3-month period of time. I did some thesis for him on superheroes, believe it or not. And ultimately, he hired me for a position called VP of Editorial, which was a spot created for me with very little responsibility or authority. But ultimately, I got a chance to learn the company from the inside. And after a while, I had presented some ideas on how to revamp the company and how it worked to Paul. And then that's when he suggested that I take the editor-in-chief position, and we were off to the races from that.
That is awesome. And it's great how like so many comic writers got their start reading like House of Mystery. Like we spoke to a few others and they all like that's what they grew up on, and I just love hearing that.
Yeah,
Um
well, you got to go back to the days of everybody was big fans of anthologies. Anthologies were books that were easy to pick up off a newsstand because ultimately every story had a beginning, middle, and end. So you didn't have to worry about finding the next issue or wondering you missed something in the issue before that. So it had this wonderful standalone quality. And if you liked the comic book format, the graphic storytelling, then that ultimately moved you out into other series from there.
That's awesome. Do you think like that impacted like how you write, just like reading anthologies like that? Because like I heard like having to write like for anthology stuff like that, like they're always writing with like the word count and page number in mind.
Well, you have the page number in mind, but I think what for me, when I was an executive, um, anthologies, I think, is a great way to test a writer to see their ability, their strength. Because if they can develop a competent storyteller, beginning, middle, and end, and create some pathos for the characters in that story in a very limited space, um, I think that shows that they have the ability to really grasp the situation and be able to develop something even more when they have a larger format to tell that story in. So I think it's a great way to protect to hone your craft and really see what it takes to create a story. And then from there, you can start to expand out and make the stories bigger when you have more pages to work with.
Yeah, that is an awesome answer. I really love that. And who did you like writing for the most? Are there any like projects that you really want to write for that you haven't had an opportunity to yet?
It's an interesting thing because people always ask me that. He goes, "Oh, did you ever get a chance to do Superman and Batman?" And I'm like, never really interested in the bigger characters. I like the more eclectic things because you have more latitude, and I find the moral grayness or the ambiguity of certain characters is a lot more interesting to delve into. That's what brings me to characters like Olmec or the Phantom Stranger or even the Metalmen, because there's a almost superficial definition of these characters and how they're portrayed. So that allows you to really go in and start to examine the personality of the characters and give them more depth and expand on it. When you have a character that's so fully developed, say like a Batman or Superman, your job is really almost custodial, making sure that you take what exists and continue to push it forward and maybe add some bits and pieces along the way, but you can't really change it much. If you go with something that's less defined, you have more latitude to really craft it into something that could be your own.
That's really a beautiful response. What's it called? Like Metal Men were one of my favorite character teams. Did you write the like that last series that came out like a few years ago? Because I
Yeah,
know
that was mine.
Sideways showed up at the end. I thought it was a
Yeah,
great like reinvention of the mythos where like Platinum was like his girlfriend or wife that he based her off of. I thought that was a really cool twist. I really
yeah.
enjoyed
And
reading
my,
it.
my concept was, if you follow Metal Men for long, you know one thing that Will Magnus is a little crazy,
Oh
and
yeah.
he actually goes mad at one spot and crazy things that happen along the way. So I always figured that it was portions of his fractured personality that was driving all the stereotypical natures of the various characters. So if you take all the stereotypes of the Metal Men as individuals and puts them together in one whole, that's Magnus. It's basically part of who he was. And then if you start to take that stereotype and then start to expand on it, then the metal men take on personalities of themselves, and then they become characters in their own right. I remember working with Len Wein, who I'd known actually even before I was at DC. Um, and we used to talk because he wrote the Metal Men too, and we used to talk about it. And we said one of the great parts about the Metal Men are you can cover up if you put a script together, you could cover up the names of all the characters, and you could pretty much tell who everybody is by their dialogue.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
and I think that's not even just works with Metal Men, but if you're as a writer, um, if you could cover up character names and you can identify every character, then you've done the right job writing that character. You've basically brought a unique voice, an individual voice to each character, so therefore they have the ability to really stand apart from each other, and really and be a clearly separate person, so that way not everybody's doing and acting in the same way or saying the same thing.
That's a that's different. I've never heard that one before. I like that idea a lot, though. I'm definitely gonna have to use that. I know Mercury. He always says like, the only metal that's liquid at room temperature," and that's like his iconic quote for me. But
Well,
I
he
never,
has
yeah, I
all those
never
quotes,
noticed.
but he was also the most temperamental, the most over hyper reactive. So always get a much. The question, what you got to do is ask one question to all the same characters and find a different answer from every character. And once you could do that, then each character has a separate personality. And I look at that in the writing style. I used to sit, when Jim Lee and I used to work together, we used to talk about the same thing. And what Jim used to say is that when he drew characters, he made sure that everybody was doing something different. So that when he was drawing the X-Men, not everybody was standing shoulder to shoulder, side by side, but you see these characters line up. almost like soldiers. He liked to have a cigarette, one have a drink, one standing, one's sitting, one's bending. Everybody's doing something different. Their body language was different, and their body language was reflective of who that character was. Then when you add the unique dialogue on that, that's when the character really rounds itself out and becomes its own person.
That is really awesome. Like I love hearing about stuff like that. Like I never noticed these like tricks in comics, but yeah, it definitely does help sell them as people, and I truly love that. Um, so one of the people who submitted these, they're a huge fan of Sideways. Like they were a diehard fan of Sideways a few years,
Okay.
and there's still like there's a new comic that came out, like there's a tie-in with Sideways, and they were like so they sent me a lot of questions about Sideways. The first one was, what was one of your inspirations for creating Sideways?
Well, everybody knows it's Spider-Man, but it's not Spider-Man. It's when we did the New Age of Heroes line of books. It wasn't as much about finding parallels to the Marvel universe, which there were some easy lines to draw back and forth. But what it really did is identify personality types and character types that we weren't really playing in the DC universe. And what I really wanted to do as a teenager who honestly didn't know how to be a superhero. That was my primary goal. Somebody who's figuring it out, but using current times and a much more contemporary setting. One of my biggest problems with DC characters was always that anytime they had a power or they got a power, they ultimately went on patrol. It's the first thing they decided to do. It's like, oh, I'm going to put a suit on and I'm going to go out and patrol the streets and keep crime safe because that's what we do. And I can't really see people doing that quickly unless there's something that really motivates them to make that decision. So what I really want to do is show that evolution of Sideways, basically being a kid who comes up with a power, still trying to figure out his own life at the same time, but then letting that power give him that sense of liberation that frees him from what he felt was holding him back until this point. And I think that's the fun part about it. And then ultimately, that power turns against you. And therefore, that liberation now becomes a curse. And then how do you deal with that? And where's your safe place? Who do the people you go to? And then ultimately, how do you make some choices along the way? And one of the things I wanted to do was I always make sure he made wrong choices because people make wrong choices. And there's no reason why just because he has a costume on, does that give him this incredible set of knowledge to do everything correct? Because that's not how it works, and always want to be in a book where you're learning along with your characters, so you're growing with your characters. That's the one thing I hear from fans the most. So I wanted to create a character that fans could grow up with, and that's why I came up with him.
No, that's really an awesome answer. Like I loved reading it in the beginning because like you don't know the status quo, so like you don't know how like crazy the first few issues. You don't know like what will be reset like with other like big heroes now. So it was really fun to read. Did you have
Yeah.
like a long-term plan for Sideways? Like how many issues did you plan out ahead of time and
Oh
like
yeah, no, I had a long-term plan. I mean, the gag is you mentioned before Sideways and Metalman. Well, the gag is that he basically finds his mother's killer, and throws her off into a dimension just to leave her there. Couldn't kill her, but he basically exiled her into a world that she could have lived or died without him knowing it. So when he shows up in Metalman, he's supposed to save the Metalman and help bring him back from another dimension. He's got a woman with her, and that's the woman who killed his mother. He actually his own sense of responsibility started to take over, and he realizes he shouldn't have taken matters into his own hands and has to go on this adventure, hopping through dimensions, trying to find the woman he left behind to die, basically. And so that was one of the storylines that's going to take place in the second year of the book if we had gotten that second year.
damn. Honestly, I feel like Sideways would be a fantastic animated series, like the vein of Invincible.
My background is animation. So I did about 10 years of animation before joining DC. So I think as an animated series, every time I'm writing, I see the scenes, I see how it comes together, I know how it would look and sound. So yeah, I'm not surprised it was that. And for me, my biggest problem is that when I was writing for DC, the publisher job was a pretty big day job, you know, and and unfortunately, it consumed so much of my time that ultimately I had to bring most of the times I'm on book or series. I brought it to an end primarily because uh, I was running out of gas, but also my schedule was falling apart, and I didn't want to be responsible for late books because I'm always beating up people for late books. So I had to lead by example, and if I couldn't get my book done or get it on time, I had to get off it. So, which is disappointing, but I had a lot of fun. But you know what? I got a chance to do. I got a chance to do a Sideways annual with Grant Morrison. We had some fun together, and Grant's a friend of mine, so it was fun to be working together. I loved his interpretation of Superman from New 52. So I had an idea that we could go visit him in on another dimension, and he wrote the hell out of that book. I had a chance to work with him and watch him and just watch his mind at work, and it's a lot different when you're executive watching Grant work than co-writing with him. It's two different experiences. I'm glad I got both.
That was when Sideways teamed up with Superman in the t-shirt and jeans, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, I remember that. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
really fun. I remember like 'cause I love the New 52 Superman.
Yeah,
Um,
that's Grant Superman from Action Comics when we relaunched with New 52.
yeah, New 52 is when I got into comics, then Rebirth like made it a lot easier to like start collecting stuff. But oh yeah, the
Yeah.
next question was what was the biggest battle you fought in editorial and won, and what's the biggest battle you fought and lost?
Um, Biggest battle I fought and won, probably it's a couple of them. Probably the biggest one I fought, a battle I won, was the relaunch of Green Lantern with Hal Jordan, which was, believe it or not, that was a monster fight, because of all the continuity and storytelling and Hal being quote unquote dead, and the Spectre, and they want to get rid of the Green Lantern Corps and all these other things going on. But Jeff Johns had a really great idea on how to pull it all back together again. But we really had to go up. We had to go upstream on that one. And wait, there's one more: the return of Kara Zor-El, bringing her back from the dead, following Crisis on Infinite Earths. That was the real big fight, because that was the one of the linchpins of Crisis on Infinite Earths that ultimately, ultimately meant we were going to undo that big event, and that event pretty much stood in place for the most part, for 20 years before I got there. So it was a big deal to get Kara Zor-El back. That was a big one. But for some reason, Green Lantern was a bigger fight because it was one of my first big fights. So that's why you remember it more. Of the ones I lost, I had this great story with Gail Simone, with Batwoman. No, I'm sorry, Batwoman, the Batgirl, Barbara Gordon. And we were going to do Flowers for Algernon with Batgirl. And what happened was, it was a story where she gets the use of her legs back, after being handicapped for so long, and ultimately, she thinks she's back to normal. She's back superheroing. Then she realizes the thing that gave her strength back, her legs back, her use of the legs back, was fading, and she knows she's going to go back to being handicapped again. And ultimately, out of desperation, she proposes to Dick Grayson, who turns her down, and she becomes very desperate and withdrawn, and ultimately has to go back into the Oracle persona. But before she did, she was going to hand off the Batgirl suit to Stephanie Brown to become the new Batgirl, and that was the story. And ultimately, the part where she gets the use of her legs back got cut out, because people didn't want to go down that road or undo that storyline, and which I thought was a disappointment, because ultimately I thought it was a very beautifully told story, about somebody's struggles and then somebody's reaffirmation to deal with their handicap, and then to know that this is who they are, and they have to be that has to be their strength, and that's who they are. And ultimately, she becomes a mentor for the new Batgirl, and we sort of lost that beat. And I think it weakened when we launched the new Batgirl. We didn't get the same impact that series had when that occurred. You get your losses along the way. But you know what? The goal is to always adjust and always plan. Where you're putting out somewhere between 50 to 70 books on a monthly basis, and when you're doing that, you're going to get a lot of disappointments. You're going to get a lot of wins, and you got a lot of stuff that you just keep moving. And as people say, I'm more surprised by the wins than I am by the losses, because of the speed of which you're turning things out. So when things work, I think it's a bigger win than people realize.
Yeah, that's really great. Like the mentor aspect of the Batgirl legacy is one of my favorites. Like I know in the new Batgirl book, that's what's happening, and I think Batgirl, Barbara is a really strong character as Oracle. It's really a shame that story wasn't allowed because, like, I think that definitely would have been a cool handing of baton.
Yeah, I think people get nervous and they were afraid the story's going to be misinterpreted for whatever reason. There's a lot of people are always looking for, well, getting worried about what could happen instead of worried about what should happen, or letting the story take itself. I mean, you got to realize, when we did Identity Crisis, that was a big deal. There's a lot of things that were extraordinarily controversial, but what happened was Brad Meltzer wrote the entire script out from beginning, middle, and end. So the entire story was written. So when we pitched the story to management, they read the entire thing, so they knew how the whole thing worked. But because it was so well written, they approved it, and that's a big win, because ultimately the quality of the material allowed that story to go forward. And for me, it identified a different sensibility in the DC universe. It made it a little more dangerous is where we were going, and there was setting up a friction between the heroes, which we were building on. So it was a very key story for us, and it really did feed 3 to 5 years worth of story following that, which is when you have a good story, is that it breeds more stories and more ideas, and it helps branch out in ways that I think really help grow the line and show the true strength of a universe that you're creating.
Yeah, I love that. Identity Crisis was like one of the first books that ever shocked me. And what's it called? I thought it was really fantastic. I love Batman's Fallout, like when they mind wiped him. I loved everything that followed from that. Um, I'm,
Yeah.
so did you get any pushback for bringing, or was that under you bringing back Barry Allen? If you had pushback for bringing back
Yeah,
Kara-Man?
Barry Allen's my favorite Flash, but that's not why we brought him back. We brought him back because they had big plans for him in TV and movies. I don't know what else to tell you.
That's
And
interesting. I usually just hear like people like they brought him back just for the sales, but TV and movies, that's a very good explanation too.
Yeah, well, what happened? The truth is, for movies and television, they go to the source material, and you can say, well, there was Jay Garrick beforehand, but there's a clear definition between who Jay Garrick was in the Golden Age and who Barry Allen was in the Silver Age. But every other Flash that followed Barry Allen was derivative of Barry Allen. You can't tell Wally West's origin without going back to Barry Allen. You can't go to any other character without going back to Barry Allen. Dead or alive, the trail always ends there. So when movies and TV or people are developing ideas and concepts, they go back to the source material, the starting point. And the starting point was Barry. So that's why when you see a Flash TV show, it's not Wally West, or a Flash in the Batman, in the Justice League movie, it's not Wally West, it's Barry Allen, because that's the one that is at the core of who that character is. That's the starting point.
Oh, that's very interesting. Like because Barry, like the TV show, is what also like reinvigorated my love for comics, and yeah, Barry Allen became my favorite Flash because of that.
Yeah,
Uh,
and Flash has been and the show, it feeds off of each other, because the show itself, the success of the show, and we had a lot of success with the Flash line, and it was with Barry Allen. When Barry Allen came in, a lot of stuff was working for it. It sold a little bit better than Wally West, but at the point, it was something that was more in line with what people's interpretations of what they were seeing outside of the company.
that's absolutely fair. And I love the stories that came from that, obviously. This question, it's interesting because I heard 2021 MegaCon, I was pressed and I heard you speak about this and I really loved how you spoke about it. The whole story, how the New 52 came to be. And you said like it was just because you were moving offices or something like that. And
The new 52, that was actually Flashpoint. What happened with New 52 was we had gotten new management inside. I got a new president for the company, Diane Nelson, and she was looking for us to really do something to make an impact. At the same time, sales had dropped precipitously in comics. We were down. I don't think there was a single book selling over 60,000 copies in the entire industry at that time. And we had seen something like around a 15 to 20% drop in sales overall in about a 6-month period. The entire industry was in free fall. So we knew we had to do something dramatic. And we had a couple of ideas, and it started with basically undoing the marriage of Lois and Clark. But as things progressed, we realized that we had to be more bold and more bigger. And ultimately, it wound up not just being a restart of Superman, but the entire line. And ultimately, that's how it went. And the funny part is, Flashpoint was in production already. So Flashpoint was actually in production before New 52 was fully conceived or even conceived. And the reason why Flashpoint was created because the company was planning to move cross country. And ultimately, I looked at things like Marvel's Age of Apocalypse, where the entire line was taken over by an alternate reality for 3 months. And lo and behold, I needed about 3 months' time of alternate reality to move the company because you're moving machines, you're moving people, there's everybody's lives in disarray, you're losing 2/3 of your staff, you're hiring 2/3 of your staff, so you knew there was going to be disruptions and you didn't want to disrupt the line. So we created a body of books that basically could drop in while we were moving, and that's what Flashpoint was. Lo and behold, the full company didn't move at that point. So, but at the same time, New 52 started up. So now we looked at joining Flashpoint to New 52, and that's how that came together. So Flashpoint was officially now the introduction to New 52, while it was really a placeholder for when the company was planning to move. Ultimately, when we did move, we had to repeat the same gag as Flashpoint with Convergence. And it basically, when you play the same trick twice, sometimes second time it doesn't play as well as the first time. But I thought the guys still did a great job pulling that all together.
Oh yeah, that's really amazing. Like I never know like the crazy stuff that comes behind the scenes, and now Flashpoint's like a really iconic story that's having a movie made. I guess two
Yeah.
movies. In Convergence, what's called that comic was being sold. Like I was living overseas when I started buying comics, and that when that was coming out, I had no idea what the context was, and I just loved like seeing all these like throwbacks. It's really
Basically,
fun.
that's what it was. It was what, what it really was we threw back to a lot of different time periods and things of that nature. It's really a hyper time concept, and which allowed us to work with a number of creative teams that weren't currently working with DC, but used to work with DC. We brought a lot of old talent back. So our new talent, our current talent, could jump ahead 2-3 months and get started on the next wave of series. And the other talent could come in and help fill a gap and tell some more stories that people felt comfortable with or enjoyed, 20, 30 years prior. And it was a lot of fun. Everybody got a chance to revisit a bunch of things. We had a lot of fun with it. I got to see Warlord again in the DCU riding a Triceratops, so I can't go wrong with that. And we had some fun with the series going ahead. But again, it was a lot of things. People always go, what was the reason behind it? And I said, I wish I could give you these beautifully constructed reasons for everything, because a lot of stuff does have a reason, but a lot of times we just got to put books out, and we want to make them as entertaining and enjoyable as possible, and as much fantasy as possible. And Convergence was a way to hopefully play upon some nostalgia, but at the same time, move a company 3,000 miles.
That's fair. Like, yeah, I really love Convergence, so I can't complain. And there was a relaunch after Convergence. Was that DCU or was that or was it Rebirth? I never.
That was the DCYOU. That was a little bit. That was I call DCYOU, which was the marketing's approach to DC Comics. That's the only way I can describe that. That was the marketing department's hand in the creative. And there was a couple of things worthwhile in it. There's a lot of things we moved on from. And it began and ended as quickly as some other initiatives did. So I can't really speak either way about it at some point, other than we were at the time DCYOU was happening, we were prepping Rebirth anyway, so we knew we were going to be going down that road no matter what.
Um, I love DCU Cyborg. Other things I didn't like, but yeah, I thought DCU had its shining elements. But for Rebirth, what was it like to bring back Wally West after like such a long time? Because I know that was like it got leaked ahead of time, and I remember I didn't even know who Wally West was when it got leaked. So I
Well,
was.
it's interesting because with Wally West, I mean, the thing about Wally West and Dick Grayson are these are characters that have a certain fondness by a large section of our fan base that grew up with those characters. So you'll get a lot of fans in their 30s and sorry, not 30s and 40s, more like 40s and 50s that are very powerfully embrace Wally West and Dick Grayson, primarily because when they were 10 or 12, Wally and Dick Grayson were 10 or 12. And then now that they're older, they want them to have families. They want them to almost in some ways reflect their own lives through those characters. It's those characters that grew up with them while other characters just don't age, you know? So I think that's why there's an affinity for them. But for me, you know, once we brought back Barry, they were just duplications of each other because ultimately, over the course of Wally West's history, he was transformed into Barry Allen, the same personality, the same ideals, married, same things that Barry had. Because if you look at the start of Wally West as the Flash with issue #1, following Crisis on Infinite Earths back in the 80s, he was a bit of an asshole. And there was a real evolution of that character. But by the time you get into the 2000s, he's responsible, he's a family man, you know, and there was very little difference between Wally in or out of costume, which is one of my problems with superheroes. When a per character has a quote unquote secret identity, and he has a costume identity, there should be a clear definition between the two. And when that line gets blurred, then ultimately you wonder why there's even the purpose or the reason behind the secret identities. And that's why you see a lot of these characters forsaking that, even though they still run around with masks on, you know.
No, yeah, that's honestly a big reason why I stopped watching the Flash show and they like do away with the secret identity and like everyone knows it. It stops being like fun when he switches between the persona. He's just the same person.
A lot of, you know what, it's I used to say there's a comic book reality or a fantasy reality that you have to embrace. There's rules. You know, you're going to know Superman flies. How he flies, we're not going to really get into that. Because no matter what argument we say, you know, how could he lift the? John Byrne used to say, how can he lift the building from a corner without it collapsing on top of them? Because it's drawn that way, you know. But there are certain superhero comic book rules that you have to embrace, and they have to embrace that secret identities work. That's part of the understanding of the comic book fiction. And a lot of people came in and they just were uncomfortable working to those standards. They just didn't know how to, and they didn't know how to write to it. They didn't know how to write the two different personalities. They didn't want to write that scene again where the person was confused or misled or came close to finding out the identity, but didn't. And it's much easier not to write secret identities, much easier. So a lot of people decided to forego it, not because of anything other than they just didn't like it, even though that was a pre-established define. But when you make that decision not to do that, you have to fully think it through and look through the full ramifications of it. I think Marvel came a little close when they did Spider-Man revealing his identity and what happens. You see some ramifications. So if you're going to give these things up, at least get story out of it. Don't just give it up and make it seem like a non-event, because ultimately that undermines everything that preceded it. If it's not that big a deal that the secret identity has been revealed, then the maintaining of the secret identity for all these decades beforehand seems superficial, and you shouldn't undermine previous stories in that manner.
Yeah, that's honestly a fantastic response. I know that's like a big complaint with like the Superman identity reveal recently. Like it didn't really amount to much, and it's really a shame. There's one more question, for DC related.
Okay.
For New 52, they ask so some things were completely reset, but then they said other things like the Green Lantern mythos and I think Batman too wasn't reset completely. Are there any things you would have done differently regarding New 52 that like you would have started
Yeah,
differently or just
yeah, there's a couple of things I would have done. I would have reset both of those completely. I would have done the full reset on that. And on top of that, we probably would have been more stringent in our rules about maintaining. We had a certain set of rules that we maintained at the start of New 52 on how to reintroduce and how to revise new characters that basically went out the window by, I would say, by the end of the second year, beginning of the third year. You know, ultimately people were just rushing books out, and I think that was a mistake. So the reality is we didn't reset those two things because we got a little cold feet, and Batman and Green Lantern were our bestsellers at the time. And there was a nervousness within everyone of whether or not New 52 would work or not. And if we knew it was going to hit as big as we did, we would have been more bold and restarted Batman and Green Lantern. But the reality was we sort of hedged our bets on both those books because they had been such big sellers that we didn't want to turn off where we thought was the most secure sales that we had. But in hindsight, that probably was a mistake. And and because in for a penny, in for a pound, as the old expression goes. And then on top of that, like I said, we should have tried to maintain a lot of the protocols in the development of the characters moving forward. But we had a little bit of a rule about where we're going to cancel books early, and I think we pulled the plug on some books too fast, including my own OMAC book. We pulled the plug fast. We should have gave every book at least 1 year to find its footing, and the problem was the bottom selling books we replaced very quickly, and we put new books in there that sold just as poorly as the books we canceled, or even more poorly than the books we canceled. And we found what I used to call the churn on the bottom, where we're constantly trying to find new books to fill the hole at the bottom. And we spent more energy trying to plug the hole at the bottom just to maintain the 52 number than we spent more energy on maintaining the quality of the books at the top, which is where all the energy should have been spent. So that's the biggest mistake made, is that we were so busy trying to create new low-selling books, we stopped paying attention to the better-selling books, and we didn't. But I'll go back to Batman for 2 seconds, because even though Batman didn't get that full relaunch, I think Scott and Greg did a brilliant job with it, and the introduction of the Court of Owls was spectacular. So I can't really say that I would have done much differently with Batman, because ultimately I think those guys brought such a fresh take to it, and Scott's ideas and sensibilities were relatively new on Batman at that time. So it wasn't that we were down such a deep road with him, but I think he really blossomed, and working with Greg Capullo really just made it our best-selling book for the next 5 years.
Oh, yeah, the Batman run for New 52 is just insane.
Yeah. So that's why. So I don't, like I said, I might say that we might be bold about it, but I would still work with the same guys because I thought they did a brilliant job.
That's absolutely fair. Like some really fantastic stuff came out of it, and it's still iconic today.
Yeah.
So the other thing, another series of questions is, so you work for Frank Miller Presents now, right?
Yes.
Is there like what do you like better about working for a creator-owned title as opposed to just DC?
It's a whole new mindset. I was saying this to somebody the other day. I've been in a corporate environment for close to 40 years. So to be this independent is a complete change of mentality and personality in some ways. And it's a little daunting to be making this radical a change in your approach to how you do your business and how you do even present yourself this late in life, as I would call it. Okay. But working with Frank is a blast. It scratches a creative itch of my own, which is important to me. Frank's fiercely independent, so he really wants us to succeed or fail on our own without anything else. And I have a number of series that I have planned. He has a number of series that we have planned, and we're gonna push through some of our books. We're hoping that we connect with an audience. For us, it's about craft and storytelling. It's about what we believe a comic should do, or how a comic should look, or how it should read. And we could be right, we could be wrong, we could be in between. But at least we'll be true to our own vision about what we want to do, and very little compromise. There was one defining moment I had with Frank, and I tell the same story over and over again. I was sitting with Frank, and we were talking about a story point, and I actually stopped and said, are we allowed to do that? I said to Frank, were you allowed to do that? And he looked at me and he goes, who are you talking to? Well, we're in charge of everything. We can do whatever the hell we want. And that was weird. That was a little weird. I'm like, I have so many people I used to have to run things by that, to say that I don't have to run it by anybody. And then that's also, you're operating without a net. So you have nobody to blame either. Not that we blame anybody, but you're on your own 100%. And you know what? I'm perfectly comfortable with that. I've taken a lot of hits for other people over the years, so I don't mind taking them for myself for a change,
No, it's really fantastic. It's honestly inspiring that you've set out on your own and you don't have to juggle that.
Yeah, well, everybody always asks me what you can do after DC, and I said I don't know. I was going to go fishing, but I didn't want to get back in the corporate environment. But I do love comics intensely, and everybody keeps on asking me, well, these going to be movies and TV shows and all these things, and I'm like, I honestly don't care. I'm here just I want to make some comics right now. That's all I really care about. I have some ideas that have flown around in my head for a while, and I have notepads all over the place. And this is stuff that you want to get out. And the funny part is, by doing it at DC, it's a very hard thing to do. Even things like Sideways, which is involved in a universe, but still, a new concept. They're hard to sell. And in DC, they stand out because you have all these other characters that sell so much better because of the longevity that they had. But to come in fresh and come in with new things, there's no pre-expectations on anything. You're just going to sell what you sell, and you got to be happy with that. And I feel comfortable with what we're doing. Naturally, I'd love to sell more books, but you know what? I got to put out more books first. And to date, we've only put out. Tomorrow will be our 6th comic. How about that?
Oh wow.
That's all. We've been at it for about a year and a half, not counting the Ashcan, but we put out 3 issues, 2 issues of Pandora, 2 issues of Ancient Enemies, and tomorrow comes out the 2nd issue of Ronin. So we got 6 issues out. So
I've heard good things about
anxious.
Ronin. I gotta pick that one up.
Yeah, Ronin's a trip. It's the goal for everything is artist first with Frank. We want these books to be visually exciting and beautiful. We want the coloring to be smart and not muddy. We want the stories to be outrageous and not worried about being adapted into a film or TV show. And that's how we sort of write right now. And we're having fun doing it.
Yeah, it's true because I hear like a common complaint is a lot of writers are told to write with the adaptate, like with the possibility of it being adapted, and like be careful not to make these characters too different from their live action counterparts. So not to not have that kind of constraint is just fantastic. Like you're
Well,
paving the road for whatever
yeah,
story you want.
and also that's cart and horse, which was my biggest fight at DC. Comics sell. People have a perception of comics about the wide reach of comics, but comics don't sell massive. You know, the audience is relatively small comparative to what a film or television, audience draws. So because of that, it's important for the comics to be the leaders in the IP and the creators of the ideas. That's the importance. We should be, because of the sheer volume of books that comic companies put out, they need to be the leader. They can't be following anybody. If you're following a movie that comes out 1 every 3 years, then what are you supposed to do with a book that comes out once a month? What type of stories can you tell in between 2 movies? You know what I'm saying? So the truth is, they have to lead. And once the comics follow the movies, they become almost a licensee of their own character. And they're letting other people determine the creative direction of the characters. And I think that's no place any comic company should be, especially on people who are the ones who are supposed to be the curators of the characters themselves. So, hopefully that doesn't they don't flip the paradigm too much, but we'll see where it goes.
Okay, no, I think that's truly beautiful, and I think that is like it's what the industry should be, and I'm really I'm happy that so many people are doing that now.
Yeah.
The thing is, so creator owned, how do you feel about like Marvel or DC owning these characters and like making so much money and like the creators' involvement in it? Like, do you feel like the creators should have some say in how their characters are adapted? Do you think they should get more money from it? Like,
okay, now I got to put on my old corporate hat on for a second. So I'm going to sound like a corporate hack for a second, okay?
Oh, no, it's fine. I love perspective.
So here's what I say. DC, I was at DC Comics for close to 20 years, okay? And I honestly was involved in the making of close to, let's say, somewhere between 17,000 to 20,000 comics during that period of time.
Oh, wow.
Okay? Put in perspective. Of those 17,000 to 20,000 comics, maybe 100 of them had storylines that were put into TV and movies.
Wow.
Okay? So, when you look at the investment from the company on the amount of product they're creating, the rates that you pay talent are actually stronger now than they've ever been. One of my biggest campaigns was in the time that I went there, I raised page rates considerably from what it was at DC when I first started to ultimately by the time I left. It was a monstrous change in the financial relationship. So therefore, there are a lot of things that talent benefit from working on these characters, and even on their professional careers. Success of working on a Batman books brings them success or brings attention to their other material. And there's a lot of things that happen along the way that helps build their career. Do you know what I mean? So while I understand frustration, I also understand that the company was very supportive of them throughout their career, and they made and compensate them properly throughout their entire career. And if this one story gets pulled out and gets used somewhere else, it feels like there's a quid pro quo going on there. I've supported you, now you support me. The problem is that the amount of money being made off these things are so out of control now that it becomes onerous, that there isn't some sort of compensation. But at DC, I know that much at least, we did set up compensation for these characters. Now, I have to go to the next level. Who is the creator of those characters? How many people have touched that character along the way? How many different creators have put their touch on this? And ultimately, who gets the best compensation for that story or that character? And that's where it gets even muddier, because you have so many people involved in the process that once you start to take the money in and start to diffuse it out, it doesn't seem like a appreciable return for your investment of what they did. But in some ways, you're compensating not just the one creator whose story might have been the starting point for what's being adapted, but also the other creators that contributed to the creation of that character that got you to that point.
That's absolutely fair. Like I know like the whole Bill Finger. I know that whole debate. Like one person made it, and then the other person just like completely reinvented it.
That's different. That's a different one, because Bob Kane took the credit all for himself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh,
That's a different
yeah.
one.
Bob
What
Kane
I'm
still
talking about
gets
is,
crap for it.
yeah, what I'm talking about is a character like an Aquaman or a Martian Manhunter, or even in some cases Superman. The evolution of who Superman was, what Siegel and Schuster created it, to the evolution of Superman that winds up on the screen. There were so many people involved in that process to get you to that spot. Artists, writers, everyone, and you want to make sure everybody's recognized. You want to get everybody a level of compensation, but what people think their compensation is worth is ultimately never going to be what they ultimately get. That's
Yeah.
just the line.
And I just want to say, I heard from like a lot of like writers already that they said DC is far better than Marvel for handing out royalties. Like I know
Oh yeah,
Len
no,
Wein, you mentioned him, like he got more money for what was it, Lucius
Lucas
Fox
Fox and
than
for Wolverine.
Wolverine. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
insane.
he told me that himself. And you know what? That's something for us at DC we're proud of. To be honest with you, that's a good thing. At the end of the day, I mean, I was talking with I was watching the Man of Steel movie, and Brian Azzarello received money for the priest that has a 3-minute segment in there that Superman talks to, because that priest was based on a character he created for a Superman run he did with Jim Lee.
Oh
But
wow, I
and
never
he
would have
didn't
thought
even know
that.
it was he didn't even make the connection himself. We had to tell him.
Wow. That is great. Wow.
Yeah, where it gets really dicey is when you have these shows that have 100 characters in them, like the cartoons. And unfortunately, the money you receive from a cartoon is minuscule. So when you have to split it between 100 people, it seems like you're getting pennies on the dollar. But it's that you're trying to compensate everybody equally, even if it's just what would be considered change.
Oh no, absolutely. But I think what you guys do is fantastic. I think it is a great way to like really make the writers happy. And the other question is, so how would you recommend today someone get into the industry? Like a lot of people I spoke to, like they knew someone in the industry at the time, and that's how they got in, or they were just mailing. And today, like obviously that wouldn't work, but I'm just curious, like how would you recommend somebody?
There's two ways. The reality is, what's the nicest way to put this?
You don't have to be nice, it's fine.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, if I don't be nice, you know what? Everybody gets a little lazy in management, okay, and they're looking for people to do their work for them. So what they're trying to do is now they're scouring to see other places where other people have success, and to bring them in and see if they can put somebody into a place that works for them. So if you are able to find ways to self-publish, you self-publish, because ultimately that material will be found. If it has any level of success, any level of traction, it's found. If you're at shows and you have a recognition, people get tables at shows and they're out there hawking their own work. You get seen, you get people to talk about your material. That's when you get found. And then ultimately, if you have any level of success, everybody wants to feed off that success, because they're all struggling for success of their own. I mean, I can't tell you how many creators right now. The most interesting story I can tell you is the creative team Cami Garcia and Robert. I forgot the guy's. It's Piccolo is his last name. Is the artist. They're doing young adult books of Raven and Beast Boy over
Oh yeah, I
at
saw an ad
DC.
for that.
Yeah, yeah. So the artist Cami Garcia was well known. I think she created Beautiful Creatures, which was a film series, and she was known in the young adult world. So we had gotten in there, but she wanted to work with an artist, and the artist we found didn't have any comic book credentials. He had no sequential art. We had no idea if he could draw sequential art, but he had 2 million Instagram followers as an artist. You know, his Reddit and all these things were followed intensely, and he had this big following online. And we rolled the dice. You know, you went, okay, here we go. Let's bring this guy. You know, let's bring this guy in, see if some of his audience comes along with it, and lo and behold, it did. It followed him, and they wound up of all the young adult titles that we launched with. That was one of the ones that broke out of the pack because it had the what you call it. It had a built-in audience that came in that supplemented the audience that we had for our own characters.
Oh, it's fantastic. I saw an ad for that, and I always think that like the style just doesn't feel like comic booky, and now I understand why.
Well, you know, I say the same thing. I'll say the same thing here. Is that the interesting part of the comics right now is comics are wallowing in nostalgia. They're stuck in it, and the problem is also pop culture's wallowing in nostalgia. They're stuck in it, and it's just this regurgitation of material over and over again. Now, the good part about comics is that we don't need that same level of appreciable audience to make ourselves successful as they do in film and TV. There's a lot more investment in film and TV, so therefore they have to hedge their bets as much as possible, and that's why they go with pre-sold material or recognizable stars or material. But comics, you don't need that big audience. You can try different things. So comics should be much bolder right now in trying different things, and that was the logic behind Frank Miller Presents, because ultimately what we wanted to do is try different things, because this is the only place you get the opportunity to do so. You're not going to get that opportunity anywhere else. You're not going to be able to find somebody who's going to take a multi-million-dollar risk on your idea, unless something happens major in your favor. But here we had a chance to test ourselves, test ideas, and see what works and what doesn't work, and see what the audience really wants, rather than just constantly feeding the same thing down to them. You know?
Yeah, I really like that mentality. Like, what's it called? It's like last year I worked like a TV show for like 2 days, and I made some money, and I just said fuck it, and I started commissioning a comic. And I'm just gonna go around like conventions, just hand it and like try to get input on it, because like yeah, like I don't want to, like I can't get hired without having anything pre-existing.
Hey, look, you got so many opportunities. You can Kickstarter, you can Indiegogo it, you can put it on web, you can put it on yourself on the web. You know, you can just put it up on Reddit. You can put it up anywhere for anybody to do. You put it out for free. Find an audience, make people interested in what you do. And I've seen people buy comics that were given free online. A publisher bought the rights or brought the rights in and actually did the print version of it, hoping that audience that was reading it online would buy it on them and then follow the series on a regular basis. It's ultimately the one thing I say to everybody: you can't do anything if you don't do anything. Bottom line is, you got to write, you got to draw, you got to keep on doing it, you got to get rejected. I've got rejection letters that date back to 1978, okay, from Marvel and DC. As a matter of fact, Paul Levitz, who hired me at DC, wrote me a rather scathing, really kind of shitty rejection letter.
I applied to an internship for Marvel a few days ago, and I just got like 2 rejections from them. So it's like,
yeah, you know, it's
fresh.
You know, but that's what happens. You got to keep on going. I
Oh
loved
yeah.
animation. It took me 7 years to get into animation from TV, you know, but I kept on shooting it. And yeah, and if you want it bad enough, you find a way in. Like, you know, I never expected to be offered the executive editor position at DC. I thought I was going to be leaving the company. Instead, they offered me the job. And that's where the kind of way it goes, is that you kind of just go for it. If you don't get it, you go for something else. You just can't stop and just complain about it. And the last thing you want to do is tell anybody is, I've got this one story my entire life that I've been dying to tell. Because guess what? If you didn't get a chance to tell it early in your life, I don't want to be the guy that gets a chance to break that one in. So you gotta have more than one idea, because ultimately everything is so narrowcast at this moment, and everybody's looking for very particular things, that if you only have one thing, you might only be able to take it to one place. And then if that one place doesn't want it, you might not be able to bring it anywhere else. So the goal is to take all this stuff back and move it around. I got my first novel coming out. I did a young adult novel, have it coming out in April. And my young adult novel was a pitch actually I built for Netflix. Netflix actually reached out to me and asked me for a superhero pitch.
Oh wow.
To which I put one together in 3 weeks and presented to Netflix the day after Jupiter's Legacy was canceled.
Oh,
And at that moment, they were not interested in superhero material anymore, lo and behold. And
oh, that hurts. Wow.
yeah, it's par for the course. You just got to roll with it. And I had this thing that I really liked. So what I did is I readapted it and pitched it as a book. And I got a publisher interested in it, and they're publishing the book. We got it coming out. But it started off as something else, but I liked it, and I just took it, and I found out a way to make it work within another medium. I got some help doing it because I never wrote prose before, so I got some guys to help me on that, just to help me structure it. But bottom line is, it came together nicely, and we'll see how it sells now. But now it's a book. The funny part is, now that it's a book, I'll get a call from Netflix going, "Hey, we'd like to see your book."
And if you could send the links for all like your current projects, we put them in our chat so people could buy stuff
I
based
sure
like when
will.
people watch the
Absolutely.
interviews. And it's really sad about Jupiter's Legacy because I watched the show, I did not like it, and I read the comic and I love the comic so much.
Yeah.
And I was frustrated how it was adapted.
Yeah,
Um,
that's yeah. There's a lot of good stuff that Mark Miller had a lot of good success, and that's a shame that didn't hit. So
yeah, hopefully Kick-Ass can come back.
yeah.
Ethan, you have any questions?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Okay.
You don't have to hold up
Hi.
for me. I can hear you without that.
Okay. Um, I wasn't sure if the mic on this was working. Honestly, these earbuds aren't very good. I was wondering if you've worked in all these mediums. You've worked in television. You've worked in comics. You just said you've written a book now. So,
Yeah.
what of those? What is your favorite one that you've done?
It's interesting. So when I started at DC, Paul Levis, who was the publisher at the time, he goes to me. He says, "There's three ways to be a writer. Okay, you can write a book and have total creative control and make very little money. Okay, and then you can write for TV and movies. You can make a whole lot of money, but lose control of your product. Well, you could sit in the middle, which is comics, get paid pretty good, maintain a lot of the control, and see if this is the way you want to push your career." So your question goes to you. What do you really want to do? What's your priority? You want to maintain that tight control? You want to make sure that this stays true to your vision? Then novel's the way to go. If you want to just basically make some quick cash, TV and movies, that's the trick. You get into that role. But if you want to do something, what I love about comics is collaboration. You're collaborating with people. You find either a writer, you find yourself an artist, you find yourself a writer. And the goal is not to dictate, but to really collaborate and find a way to work. When I'm writing, I do what's called the Marvel style of writing, which means I write a full outline and then, or sometimes a loose outline, hand it off to the artist. The artist adapts it, lays it out, and makes changes along the ways. I don't dictate panel by panel like a lot of other people do. So they take some liberties about where they think the priorities are. They might change some scenes. And then the story comes back to me, and what I think the characters were saying doesn't match the pictures. But in some ways, it challenges you to understand your character, because if you could take what they drew, that's not what you thought it was, but still make the character operate true to the way you believe the character could be, then your character is rounding itself out. You understand that character well enough that the character can move in and out of situations. And ultimately, I think that makes a better character and a better writer. I think you have to be nimble in what you do. You hear the expression all the time, kill your babies, because there's certain lines you get so enamored with that are so brilliant that you think are the best thing in the world. But those are usually the first things to go. I mean, I take this 5 mile walk in the morning, and I bring I record some things that I'm thinking about, and I'm sitting there and I'm spitting out things that I think are brilliant as I'm walking. Other people stare at you, and then ultimately I get home and I print them all out and I look at them like, this is drivel, and but you get yourself so enamored in what you're saying and doing that you get lost in it. But sometimes it's good to have another set of eyes. So if you're a novelist, get yourself a good editor that can speak to you honestly, and if you're a comic book artist, a writer, you get a good artist that you can really work with. And if you're in TV and film, you get yourself a good manager so you don't get screwed on the contract. And that's pretty much the three directions you go. Does that help?
Yes, it does actually. Thank you.
I didn't answer the question. I like it. You know what it is? What I like, what I like about the novel is I never did it before, but it's a lot of work. My biggest problem is I'm impatient. So things that take a long time kill me. Like I finished my book in July and it comes out in April. And so it's almost a year after, and I'm like sitting there going, what does it take so long to print this son of a bitch up? Why don't we get this book out right now? And because when I do comics, I'm literally finishing a book, it's going right to the printer, and from the printer, it's 3 weeks before it's on the stands. So you're working up onto it the last minute. And when I worked on an animated show, I worked on a first animated series called Reboot back in the 90s, or as somebody said it to me the other day, the late 1900s, which really upset me. But back in the 90s, I was working on Reboot, and because it was computer animation, you could fix that show up to the last second, and we were constantly tinkering with that show. So, but there's a sooner point with TV and film and comics, you got to go pens down. I got a schedule, I got to get it out. And the good part about that, it's periodical, so I can get them better the next time. When you're a book or a movie, you're constantly tinkering with it because you're only going to get one pass on it, and that book's going to be out there for a year or so before you can even think about doing something else or ever do something else again with it. So that's why I like comics and film, TV, because you can sort of just make up for your mistakes the next time. But comics are fun. I love. You get a good artist, you get excited when you see the comic art come in. It's no better feeling to see something that you thought about and wrote about come back visually, and the visuals are better than you even imagined it to be. And I've worked with some really good artists that have accomplished that for me, so that's a good thing.
What's really amazing is everyone we've spoken to, they're all veterans, and their excitement is just like, it's still there. Like you can tell, like they're just like children. They're just so excited to finally be able to work in this, and like it hasn't gone away at all. It's just really fantastic to hear that.
It sticks with you. I think that's the nostalgia part of it. You sort of remember what, and that's the interesting thing about writing. And the hardest thing about writing is remember what you love about a character. Remember why you love the medium, what attracted you in the first place, what brought you back to it on an ongoing basis, and find a way to take whatever it is excited you and bring it to the material they're working on, but don't do it verbatim. Don't do it as a repetition of something that's 30, 40, 50 years gone. Find a way to create that same level of excitement and achieve those same goals, but set in an environment that attracts an audience that's looking for something different today. Because at the end of the day, everybody's looking for good stories. The interpretation of what a good story is might change, but a good story is still a good story. And for you need to find a way to tell what a good story is for today's audience, more so than for an audience that doesn't exist anymore.
That is really amazing. I love like I'm just so excited. This is just awesome.
I have a question. Working as a publisher in comics, how do you keep there's so many books happening at the same time. How do you keep track of all of them at once and like keeping the continuity and such in place?
Okay, there's three approaches to it. This approach is, first of all, you keep track of everything because you have a staff of 160 people. So you make sure everybody else does it for you. No, but there's three sets of rules. There are people who used to run a very tight continuity, which gets claustrophobic because ultimately the stories just keep on piling on top of each other, and it limits what you can and can't do with your characters. Okay, so the more story you tell, the less you can tell with the same characters because you're limiting what you can do, and ultimately prevents you from resolving any stories or issues because you always have to leave them open for the next time. Second rule of thumb is you completely ignore continuity. You sort of let things go as it is and let each person tell their own story. Devil be damned. As long as the character looks the same, that's all we really care about, and we go from there. And a lot of people do that now because they just have 40 to 60 years story behind them, and they don't want to manage it all. My firm belief, and this is actually the Stan Lee approach, I hate to say it, is my belief is continuity is be true to your origin of the character and always remember what your character's origin is, where he started from. Remember your character's personalities, so how they speak and how they act and what their particular strengths and weaknesses are. And when you introduce other characters, always refer to their last appearance. Okay? Not the 10 other before that, just the last one. Okay? Because by identifying the last one, it gives you that connection to the other previous meetings because they all attach to each other. So you don't have to bring all that continuity in, just the last time we saw him. And it's just a passing reference. Once you make that reference, you've connected the story, you connected the characters to its past, and that allows you to keep moving forward. And ultimately, it keeps you sane because you're not trying to reconcile so many different interpretations of so many different characters that all stories are being told at the same time. And I mean, if you look at DC right now, they did 3 Jokers as a story, but there's about 6 different types of Joker stories being run at the same time, you know? And now who's reconciling all those differences? They're not bothering because ultimately they're just trying to get books out the door. So the best way to manage it is with less material. The problem in the corporate environment is you got to sell more books to be successful in your job for the amount of profit you got to make. So you have to manage the amount of material you create, manage how many stories you tell with the same characters, and then at the same time, manage expectations in regards to how well the stuff sells to the people who you're working for. So it's a lot of juggling going on, a lot of last minute decisions, a lot of changes, and a lot of things slip through the cracks because as much as you read everything, and I used to read everything that came across my desk, retaining it is a different ballgame. You know, I mean, I can tell you how many books that I see from DC that came out while I was there that I must have read and received in a bundle, and I have no recollection of. You know, I'm like, oh wow, I can't believe we put that book out. You know, it's amazing. You know, I tell by the logos, you know, whether or not I worked in a series or not.
One thing someone just sent in actually. Okay, so they asked, was there any like behind the scenes drama between Rebirth and Doomsday Clock because of the delays? Like they said like because like in the question they're asking like they said it felt like Rebirth like stagnated a bit while like Doomsday Clock was coming out and like it felt like the JSA wasn't reintroduced organically.
It's hard to say. I mean, granted, you know, the Doomsday Clock story. It's a funny title because I always said when we had a crossover with the Watchmen, it was Doomsday. That's what I was saying. When DC had a crossover with the Watchmen, it was Doomsday. So in fact, it was called Doomsday Clock. Cute.
Were you against a Watchmen crossover? Like, was it like, did the Office think it was a good idea at the time? Like, I enjoyed the story, but I'm just curious.
You know what? The good part is it was in the best hands possible. Jeff and Gary Frank probably are the best people to tell that story. I mean, Jeff was so integral to everything happening in the DC universe. So I felt if anybody's telling that story, it's him. So if you're going to do it, you had the right crew to do it with. I would prefer to cross over the Watchmen than I would to cross over with the Marvel universe. Let's put it that way. I was vehemently against Marvel DC crossovers than more than anything else. But then again, I was the guy that wanted Before Watchmen. So, you know, I cracked that egg open with Before Watchmen. And ultimately, once the Watchmen TV show was created, they became a lot more fair game. So it just seemed natural to do that. I mean, and ultimately, I like the idea of an omnipotent Dr. Manhattan behind everything in some ways, because just his ability to be existing in so many planes and so many times. I've got charts about all the different places throughout the DC universe that Dr. Manhattan appeared simultaneously to help change the course of things, so to speak. It's somewhere buried somewhere. But it's like I said, but for the Rebirth side, unfortunately, as with everything, my problem with the Rebirth was strong for us, but the problem with everything with Rebirth is we doubled down on all the same characters. You know, we did double ships on everybody. So we were accelerating the storytelling with a lot of same characters, less characters, which means you burn through story a lot faster, which means that the shine and the excitement that comes off the initial rebirth diminishes quicker, because you're going through stories faster and things become a little more commonplace. Just the same way with New 52, after a period of time, the luster comes off New 52 because people are rushing stories out and they're not redeveloping the characters with a level of originality. They're just dusting them off more so than really reinventing them. Rebirth also moves through the characters so quickly that ultimately you get back to the spot with the characters which forced the New 52 launch in the first place, meaning you're back to a place where they're commonplace or taken for granted or feeling average again and losing the interest of the readers. And once you lose that interest, you have to do something dramatic to bring their interest back. And then ultimately you're back in that loop again of having to do things event-wise to drive attention. And unfortunately, the comic industry is now built on event-driven personalities, meaning that's all they want to see. And the problem with event doesn't work unless you let it sit for a while. You have an event happen, you bring changes from it, it's got to sit there for 2 to 3 years. Let those changes take root so that you can see that the event had serious ramifications. But the more you collapse events into each other, there's less chance for that new status quo to take hold. And as soon as the new status quo is introduced, you're already changing it with the next event, then nobody has any basis for what these characters are, or what stories to tell with them. And I also used to joke about a Marvel and DC crossover and saying, okay, we cross over Marvel and DC. Who's going to cross over? What characters? What interpretation? Because I know the story everybody's going to want to see, and I know the version that everybody's going to want to read, but those aren't the characters that they're telling stories with right now. So do you take your entire universe backwards to basically, feed into an event that will end, and then ultimately you're back in the same mess you were once the event's over, because you're back in a situation that you have to dig yourself out of. So it's best you take your own characters, examine them, and dig yourself out of your own hole rather than use other people to prop that up. But since Watchmen were in-house, it was okay.
That is really fantastic. Are there any more? I'm out of questions that were submitted. Ethan, do you have anything else? I don't want to keep you too long.
No, that's okay. That's good. We were at it for over an hour, so that's fine by me.
I guess I don't know what's been asked already. I was in class, so I had to come in a little late. But how do you feel about just adaptations and the state of movies and such of comic things?
You gotta understand, I came from TV before going into comics, so I already knew things have to be adapted. You can't do a one-for-one comparison, a one-for-one adaptation. If you can, that it's an amazing feat. But the reality is, I believe that once you're in different mediums, you have to play to the strength of the medium, and you have to tell the story in accordance to what the medium you're in. If you're telling episodic television, then you got to tell an episodic story. If you're telling a 2-hour movie, you have to be a lot more concise on what you're doing. And in the comic, you're telling a periodical that has to keep on it. It's supposed to be never ending. It's ongoing. So you move at different paces. Your story moves in a different way. Your priorities are different. Your character development is different. Your expectations are different. And ultimately, you got to work to what works to the strength of your medium, because some things in comic can look silly on film and TV, and some of the things that film and TV does look pretty damn boring in comics. And ultimately, you got to play to your own strength and stop worrying about making sure it's the same way across the boards, because it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be.
So, like with the new, with everything DC has announced recently with their adaptations, what do you think? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think they're going down the right road, meaning they're using the comics as inspiration, and they're telling their own story. I mean, hell, if you look at Ant-Man Quantumania, that's its own story. That has nothing to do with any comics. Ant-Man never fought Kang in his own book, at any time ever. So what I'm saying is that it's good that they're crafting something that works for itself. The only thing I always say to everybody, you always got to give yourself enough room that if something isn't working, you have to be able to acknowledge it. The one thing I always hated in comics, and I kind of hate in movies too, is when you tell a bad story and then you tell another bad story to correct the bad story. And then ultimately, all you're doing is drawing attention to something really stupid that you did, and you're trying to justify it. And I think you wind up looking stupid doing it, you know? And, I've seen that in the films, I've seen that in comics. And sometimes you make a mistake. Sometimes it's best just to ignore it because ultimately the fans themselves will ignore it because the story has no ramifications or no impact. So it's best to leave it behind and move it forward rather than trying to justify it and finding a way to make it work. That's misspent energy that could be spent on making a different story better, you know?
Yeah, thank you.
You got it. So we good there, sir?
We are.